For the past probably like 6 weeks or so, I have been in one of the worst reading slumps of my life. I don't think I physically finished a book since sometime in the middle of December, because anything that I've been picking up, I end up DNFing because it's just not working out for me for one reason or another. I have been saying this for the past little bit, but I feel like I've just burnt myself out, and everything that I keep picking up feels too familiar, doesn't feel new or different or anything like that, and therefore nothing's really working for me. And the only books I've actually been able to get through lately have been audiobooks. I've been trying to venture out of my comfort zone via them, and it has been working, even though I haven't been enjoying a lot of the books that I've been picking up. But either way, today I did want to tier rank all of my recent reads for you. So I'm pretty sure we're jumping a little bit back into December, because I had done a tier rank somewhere in the middle of December, and I looked up that video, and we're starting off in this video right where that one had left off. So if you did want to see that last one, I will have a link down below. But basically, the books that we're going to be tier ranking in today's video is more or less the past 6 weeks or so. It's not a lot of books because I haven't been reading a lot because of this horrible slump I'm currently in. And on top of that, a lot of them aren't really going to be ranked very well. But either way, we're going to do it. So let's get into it. Just so that we're all on the same page, I am working off of 5 different tier ranks. I have loved, enjoyed it a lot, it was okay, wouldn't have hurt to DNF, and then DNF'd, which means I literally did not finish it. So I feel like they're all pretty self-explanatory, and with that said, let's get started. So first up, I do have In the Weeds by B.K. Borison. So this is the second book in her Love Life Farms companion series, and I did read the first book in the series, and I absolutely loved it. It actually was one of my favorite reads from 2022, and then right when I finished that one, I ended up moving on to the second book in the series, and unfortunately, it did not work out for me as well as the first one. This was a second chance romance, and it was one of those one night stands turned into more later on sort of thing, and that is just not my favorite type of book to read. I'm not really a big second chance romance fan. I'm also not really a big one night stand turns into more sort of situation, because usually it does end up feeling like all of their feelings are tied towards that first night that I feel like we didn't get to see enough of as it starts. So therefore, I'm not really sold on the romance when I'm reading it. And then on top of that, I didn't really feel like these two people were meant to be. I think that, yeah, they could make it work, but I didn't really feel the soulmate sort of feeling. And therefore, for a lot of reasons, all of that plus more, I just really was not into the romance, and I didn't really enjoy it. So it was just okay for me. I can see why it worked for some people, but there was just a lot about it that really did not work for me. But either way, after that one, I did end up moving on to the third book in the companion series, which was Mixed Signals. And unfortunately, I did end up DNFing this book. So this one did have, it kind of had an instant attraction vibe. So these two people, they had known each other for a very long time, and then all of a sudden one day, this girl's, her eyes open, she sees this guy in a new light, and then all of a sudden now she is falling for him. But he has liked her for a very long time, and she just never really saw him as somebody that she could be attracted to. So all of a sudden she's instantly attracted to him, and then they get into some sort of fake dating situation of sorts, and I'm just no longer a really big fan of fake dating, really. And it just feels like a cop out of a reason to actually give each other a shot. They wanted to try to date, but they weren't really good at dating, so they're let's date each other, but this isn't really going to be real, but also it's kind of going to be real. And I was just I wasn't really into it for a lot of reasons, and I think I ended up giving up around the halfway point. I got to the first sex scene, and I just really did not like that scene for a lot of reasons, which is whatever, I won't get into it, but either way, didn't like it, and that was around the point where I ended up giving up on it. This next book is the last book in the Bailey Brothers companion series. So I was slowly reading this companion series over the course of a couple of months, and every single time that I picked up the next book, it just got worse and worse for me. A lot of them were instant attraction-y. A lot of them I just wasn't really sold on the story or anything like that, but happened to be I was really liking the world. I was really liking the vibe of this small town that it was set in. So therefore I kept reading them. I'm you know what, I've got one book left. Let's just freaking finish it. So that's exactly what I did. And unfortunately, I was quite disappointed by the ending, mostly because I feel this book, while it was quite thick, we kind of got a rushed romance in the beginning, so that the second half of the book can kind of conclude the series overall. We were slowly following specific storyline as the all the books kept going. Even though you can read them all as standalones, you were following this one overarching story, and by the end of the series, obviously you got to finish it up. So I feel this book was more focused on that instead of the actual romance, but I was still here for a romance, and therefore I wasn't really into everything else that was going on, because I'm okay, we got a quick romance that I didn't even like, and now you just want to finish up this story, and I wasn't even a fan of how it was all being finished up, and there was just a lot about it that I was I'm no longer into this. I really should have stopped myself after the first slash second book in the series, whatever. So anyway, really did not end up enjoying this one, and it wouldn't have hurt if I DNF'd it. I really don't feel I would have been missing out on much if I never even picked it up to begin with, but unfortunately I somehow did read the entire thing. This next book is Lore, and unfortunately, I did end up DNFing this book. I don't really remember when I DNF'd it, but I was kind of expecting something a lot different from it than I ended up getting. I kind of thought we were going to get some sort of like Greek mythology competition between like the descendants of these Greek gods of sorts, and it's going to be set in New York, and it had this whole urban fantasy vibe. Like that is kind of what I heard and what I was getting from like what people were saying about the storyline. But then, unfortunately, once I started reading it, I just wasn't getting what I wanted from it, and it ended up just going in like somewhat of a different direction. And I just kept being disappointed. I'm like, this isn't fun. I'm kind of bored. Like, where is the action? Where is the competition? Where is all of the fun stuff? And I was just like not really into it. So I ended up giving up on it early because I just didn't think it was going to get to where I wanted it to get. And then at this point, you could kind of already feel that the slump was really starting to hit hard. So I decided to go back to one of my all-time favorite series, and I did an entire reread of the entire Throne of Glass series. So obviously, I absolutely loved it. I only grabbed the first book in the series, but I did read all of them. Well, actually, I skipped Tower of Dawn this time around because I just wasn't really in the mood to read that one, but I had a great time with my reread. Honestly, I should like already do a reread right now because I'm still in the slump that I was when I picked this one up. So maybe I would at least enjoy Throne of Glass again if I picked it up, but we're not going to do that. Next up, after that, this is actually the beginning of January. This was the first book that I picked up in January, and it's called The Alias, and it was supposed to be some sort of like this guy from the mafia ends up going into witness protection with this other girl. They have to be like arranged to be married, and then they're gonna like fall in love or something like that. And oh my god, I thought that storyline was gonna be so cool. And then the cover on this, I was like blown away by it. I'm like, this looks like a great freaking read. So I picked it up, and then unfortunately I did end up DNFing it because it had instant attraction. I wasn't really into the romance very much or the storyline. Like there was just a bunch of stuff that wasn't really working for me. And then on top of that, as I was getting later into the book, I slowly started realizing that this was not like a complete standalone. Pretty sure it was part of a companion series, and this wasn't the first book in the companion series. So I kept getting information and like meeting people who were obviously from other books, and I was just completely lost. I was not getting enough information about them, and therefore it just felt like unnecessary information. And I just like the whole thing about it was really not working for me. And then on top of that, wasn't into the romance. So did end up DNFing that one. Anyway, next up, I did read A Killer of a Certain Age. So this was the point where I'm like, okay, I really gotta get away from romance, try something new, switch up my genre. And I decided to pick up this, I don't know, is it a mystery? Is it a thriller? I don't really know. But you're following a bunch of these ex-spies or agents of sorts. Like they were kind of like trained killers, and they're kind of retiring right now. It was like a bunch of old ladies who were going on a trip. And when they get there, they kind of find out that the agency that they had worked for was trying to like kill them or something like that. So now they have to like fight back and try to like, you know, save their lives or something like that. I don't really know. But either way, it was kind of just a very okay read for me. Like I wasn't really blown away by it, but it wasn't sucky enough to be like, oh, I wish I didn't really read it. But also it wasn't really very memorable either. So it kind of very much fell flat into like the middle section for me, and that is why it ended up in that tier ranking like spot. So anyway, next up, I did end up reading Part of Your World, and what's funny is I'm actually going to put this on enjoyed it a lot, because in the moment I actually really did enjoy it. I did read it via audio, and I was enjoying the story as I was reading it. But then by the time I got to the end, I realized that I didn't really like as much of it as I thought I was liking. Like in the moment, I was really feeling it. I was really like connected to the story, connected to the characters, and I was having a great time. But then after the fact, I kind of realized that like if the roles were reversed, of like the girl was acting like the guy and the guy was acting how the girl was acting, I would not have liked the book as much. Like I really didn't like how she treated him, and I feel like if he would have treated her that way, I would have absolutely hated him and hated the story. And I know that sounds a bit misogynistic. I don't really know what like those words are, but I know that that's not really the right way to look at it. And that's why I feel like I should bump, you know, the book down a little bit, because it's like, you know, everybody, like, you know, if one person was acting this way, then you should judge them the same way as the other person. But for some reason, in the moment that I was reading it, I wasn't really feeling it, and that's why in the moment I enjoyed it a lot. But then after the fact, I'm like, you know what? I didn't really like her at all, and I really didn't like how she like treated him and everything like that. Like he deserved so much better, and therefore I have quite mixed feelings. But at the end of the day, it's like I didn't really have a lot of good reads this past month, so I feel like I have to put something above all else, especially if like I did enjoy it in the moment that I read it. So that is why I'm putting that one there. Next, I tried reading Beholden, but unfortunately, I did not really get very far into it, and I did end up DNFing it. So I don't know if I made it maybe like 70 pages in, 50 pages in, but either way, there was a lot about it that wasn't working for me. First of all, I think it had either Into Love or at the very least Instant Attraction, which obviously I am not a fan of. And then on top of that, I wasn't really liking the writing style, and I wasn't really connecting to the characters right off the bat. There was just a lot about it that I knew right away, like, this is not going to work for me. So I gave up on it early, and I very much do not regret that decision. But anyway, after that, I did end up picking up Flame Dreamcaster by Cinda William Chima. So this is the first book in the Shattered Realm series, which is a spin-off from the Seven Realm series, which I did read at the end of last year and really did enjoy. So in this series, you're basically following the children from the original series. And I'm not always the hugest fan of spin-offs in general because I feel like they have to be done really well. Like, I don't really want to see you butcher the original like characters. Like, I really want to see them happy and just get another story from this universe. And if you are going to show us, like, you know, the characters from the previous series, let me see them happy and let me see them thriving and let me just get little snippets of them, like a cameo sort of thing. But unfortunately, this was the opposite of all of that. Not only in the first chapter do you literally kill one of the most beloved characters from your previous series, but you also show us that all of the main characters who ended off that series showing us like, oh yeah, maybe now they're going to get a happily ever after, let them live a good life after everything they've been through. No, you showed us that for the past 20 years, they have not been living the best life, and now they are currently just not in the best of places. And I just really didn't want to see that because I really had good feelings towards that series, and now you basically told me that like everything that happened after it wasn't really good, and I just don't want to have that in my head. So I started off this book with like a really bad mindset. I'm like, why did you do that to my brain? Like, I really did not want to know this about them. But then on top of that, like, just forget about the previous series. I really wasn't a fan of the main guy in this book. Like, you're following the kid of the main characters from the previous series, and I just really wasn't a fan of him. Like, I felt like he did the stupidest moves left and right. I'm like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And I feel like the entire book, like, he should have been dead 10 times. Like, I don't know how he got out of all of the situations that he got out of. I don't know how he wasn't caught earlier. Like, everything about it, I'm just like, I do not understand this. And then on top of all of that, it also had an insta-lovey romance, which I very much was not a fan of. So unfortunately, it wouldn't have hurt if I ended up DNFing this book. Somehow I did make it through the entire thing, but I didn't end up continuing on with the series after that because I just was not feeling it. This next book is The Chemist by Stephanie Meyer. So this was actually recommended to me by my sister. This is the same author that has written Twilight, but I've never read Twilight, so I'm pretty sure this is the first book that I ever read by her. But my sister was a really big fan of this a couple of years ago, and she actually had given me her copy of the book like probably 3 years ago or so to add to my library to like get around to it when I wanted to. And I never really got around to it up until like literally now because I've been trying to get out of my comfort zone lately, and I knew that this book was a little bit different of things that I've read in the past. So I'm like, you know what? Finally time to give it a shot. And that is exactly what I did. So I don't know if this would be considered like a thriller or a mystery, but you're basically following this girl who used to work for the government as one of their chemists. And then, but way back when, for some reason, they decided they wanted to kill her. Maybe she knew too much information. I don't remember the details, but either way, she has basically been on the run and been in hiding ever since. And at the beginning of the book, they found her and they're kind of like, look, we need you to come back. We need something from you for whatever reason. There's like a terrorist attack and we need your help. So she was kind of like very wary about it, but she decides like maybe see what's up and see if like, you know, what's the situation. And that's kind of where the story goes. And like, you know, obviously, you know, there's a lot more stuff that happens, but basically I really did like the book right off the bat. Like I connected to the story. I'm like, oh my God, this is so fun. This is so different. I was really into it. But then around the halfway point, it started like losing my interest because first of all, there was like a romance subplot added in, and unfortunately it had incest. So that really turned me off to that whole like semi-side thing that was going on. But then on top of that, the middle of the story, I feel like just got really, really boring. Like we were building up and it was being so much fun, and like all of it was going up and up and up, and then all of a sudden we got to a standstill for a while there, and I just really lost interest very quickly at that moment. I think it was also because like the insta-lovey sort of situation was really like turning me off, and therefore nothing was going on and all of that was going on and I just wasn't into it, so I wasn't liking it. And then by the time we got to the end, I was just very meh about it. So I feel like I'm gonna put this in it was just okay, because honestly I did like it in the beginning, even though I didn't really like the second half of it. This next book is Spinning Silver. So this is a Rumpelstiltskin's retelling that's a fantasy romance standalone, and I've always seen pretty solid things about it, but I've had it sitting on my shelf unread for years and I just was never getting around to it. So I finally decided to try it via audio because maybe I would actually enjoy it that way, because I knew I just wasn't going to pick it up physically. So I ended up trying the audio, and I do think that unfortunately that was quite a bad move on my part because I wasn't really liking the narrators. I'm pretty sure there were at least 2 different woman narrators that each had a different accent, and not only was I having a very hard time telling them apart, like, okay, whose POV are we looking out of right now, but also I was having a very hard time like literally understanding what they were saying because of their accents. So therefore I had to listen to the audiobook a little bit slower so that I could actually understand what they were saying, and therefore I not only did I feel like it was dragging because I was listening to it slower than I usually like to listen to audiobooks for, but also I wasn't really feeling the actual story. I feel like nothing was actually happening. I'm pretty sure I got 25% in when I decided to actually DNF it, and I really don't regret that decision. I do think that maybe I would have enjoyed it more if I read it with my eyes. Maybe I wouldn't have been like turned off because of the narrators, or maybe it was them that was making me not enjoy the story for what it was. But either way, something was not working for me and I DNF'd it. And I honestly do not know if I'll ever go back and try to read it physically, because I'm just now like turned off from the story because of how much I wasn't enjoying it when I read that first 25%. So trying to get out of my comfort zone again, I did end up picking up The Silent Patient, which is a very popular psychological thriller or something like that. Basically in the story, you're following this girl who murdered her husband like 7 years ago, and ever since that moment she never spoke again. So ever since then she's been put into like a psych ward, and then at the beginning of the story this therapist comes in to try and like get her to talk or just try to be her new therapist of sorts. I don't really know, but either way in the story you're gonna end up following his storyline. Like you're gonna get to see stuff about his life and his past, things along those lines, while you're following this girl who literally doesn't talk. And then slowly obviously those two storylines are gonna connect, and it's like you're gonna figure out the mystery and things along those lines. So happens to be right when I started, I was really into it. I was like, oh my god, this is so different, this is so new, this is so exciting, and I was really liking where it was going. But then as the story went on, I started liking it a lot less and less, and by the end of it I wasn't really the biggest fan. So I feel like I'm gonna put it at it was okay, because honestly like it caught my attention. It really got me wanting to keep going and seeing it where it was gonna go, even though I didn't really like it by the time I got to the end of it. Like I was very wowed by the ending. I'm like, oh my god, I'm not sure if I saw this coming or not, but it still wowed me, even though I feel like it had a lot of plot holes in it. I wasn't really enjoying getting there, if that makes sense. Like the storylines that we were following, I just wasn't a fan of. Like there was cheating in it, and I just wasn't really per se loving the way the story was set up, and there was a lot about it that I didn't absolutely love, but at the same time I was intrigued enough to keep on listening to see where it was going to go. So I feel like it deserves to go on the it was okay sort of section. This next book is 4-Letter Words by J. Daniels. So I had actually read another book in the companion series that this book is a part of in the past, and I was a really big fan of it. So that's why I kind of decided that I wanted to give this one a shot. But unfortunately, it did not really end up working out for me, and I did end up DNFing it. I think maybe like around the 30% mark or something like that. But I just wasn't really liking anything that I had read up until that point. So I'm like, why should I continue with it? Like, first of all, I wasn't really into the romance. I feel like it was happening too quickly, and I also wasn't liking a lot of the things about it. Like, I feel like there was a lot of like imbalance with it. Like she was sharing a lot more with him than he was sharing with her, because he was actually keeping a lie from her and he didn't really want to tell her. And I first of all feel like they were falling for each other too fast for the amount of interactions they had. I also feel like it was a lot more telling than it was showing. Like we were just being told about how they were feeling for each other instead of like showing us why they were actually falling for each other this quickly. And then on top of that, I don't really like lies and deceit, and he was obviously keeping a lie that was going to blow up in his face eventually. And then on top of that, I didn't really like how little he was giving her versus how much she was giving him. So all around the board, wasn't really into it, gave up on it pretty early on. And then Fractured Sky by Catherine Cowles is, I'm pretty sure, the only book that I physically read this past month that I actually finished, because all the other ones that I tried picking up, I literally put down early. But unfortunately, I didn't even really love it. So the thing that I have with Catherine Cowles is that her books feel way too similar to me. It's like once you've read one, it feels like you've read them all. And I feel like I enjoyed the first one or two of them, and I really did like them for what they were, but then some of them just don't really compare to the others. And since they always feel the same, like it's just a romantic suspense in a small town, you get the same sort of setup, the same sort of plot lines, it always goes in the same direction, and they always feel the same. And therefore, I can't even tell you what this book was about, because they all blend together in my head. Like once I've read one, I feel like I've read them all, and therefore it all feels like just one storyline in my head. So I feel like it wouldn't have hurt if I DNF'd this book, even though I feel like it was just okay, except I've read it like a couple of times before already, because I've already read a handful of her books in the past. So I really didn't end up caring for it, and I don't know how I made it to the end, but somehow I did. So this next one's pretty funny. So The Last Magician is the first book in an urban fantasy series, and I have wanted to read this series for a while. Like I always thought that it sounded so cool. It's got like time travel in it, and it's an urban fantasy set in New York City. You kind of get to go back to the past, you have a little bit of the future. It sounded like an interesting sort of story for me, and I finally decided to pick it up, and then somehow I ended up getting like 90 or 95% in when I literally decided to DNF it, which I honestly, like, I can't really explain why I didn't just be like, okay, let's finish it, but I feel like I was dragging on for so long, and I should have given up way earlier. And then there was a certain point where I'm like, okay, I really can't do this any longer. I really don't even care how it ends, because I just know I'm not going to continue on with the series. So I finally just like put it down. So I didn't even get to that last little bit, but I will officially say that I DNF'd it. But honestly, it's like I read the most of it, so it's like it's not 100% a DNF, but we're going to put it there anyway, because I just think that it's funny that I literally put it down like in the last couple of chapters. And then because I've been trying to get myself prepared for the new release in the Shadowhunter universe, universe, I did end up deciding to jump back to the Infernal Devices before I went and reread the Last Hour series. So I did do a reread of Clockwork Angel, Clockwork Prince, and Clockwork Princess, and I really had a great time with them. I always was a fan of this series, but I always thought that it wasn't necessarily one of my favorites from the universe. And even though it's still not one of my favorites from the universe, because I do like a lot of other books more than them, I realized that I actually like this series more than I even remember liking them. So not only am I happy that I revisited these books and I had a great time with them, but also I'm happy that I revisited them because I actually realized that I liked them even more than I remember having liked them. Then I picked up Eliza and Her Monsters. So this is a YA, I think it could be considered a contemporary romance, but either way, you're following this girl who's kind of like a loner in school. She doesn't really have any friends, kind of goes like under the radar, but online happens to be, she's a very famous writer. She kind of writes this like, I don't know, something online, like a comic of sorts, and it's very, very popular. So it's kind of like a storyline of following her life. And then she ends up meeting this guy in school and they're gonna end up having a romance, and he happens to be a fan of her writing, but she doesn't really tell him that like she is the actual writer because it's all anonymous and things like that. And then obviously eventually that will blow up in her face and it's going to be like a storyline like that. So I mean, it's interesting because I actually liked it for what it was for the majority of the book. Like I was kind of really into it. I was having a great time with it. But then at that moment where everything blew up in her face is when the storyline very much went downhill for me. I just didn't really like how he reacted to the situation. And then I also wasn't really a fan of how she acted after that situation. And I feel like the whole end of the book really was not for me. So unfortunately, I feel like this book was just okay. I feel like it's leaning on like, it wouldn't have hurt to DNF it, but honestly, like I did like it for a while there. So it was just okay, but I wouldn't per se recommend it because like, why would you want to fall in love with a story and really, really like it only to be disappointed by the ending? And that's exactly how I felt about it. So I feel like, you know, I'm kind of going to have to balance it out being like, well, I liked the beginning, didn't like the end. It was just okay, but wouldn't per se recommend it because I really was not a fan of how it ended. And then the last books that I have to share with you are my most recent reads. I did end up reading the entire Caravel series. And what's funny is that I feel like I enjoyed the first book a lot, but then the rest of the series completely went downhill. And I feel like the second book was just okay, even though it felt like a repetition of the first book, but I definitely didn't like the second book as much. And then the third one definitely should have DNF'd, but unfortunately I didn't. So I feel like the premise of the story had a really good idea going for it. Like I really liked the idea of the world, but I feel like everything about it just was not executed very well. And therefore I just very much was not a fan of it by the time I got to the end. And I'm like, oh, I just should have given up after the first book, but somehow I made it through all three. So either way, wasn't really a fan of the series overall, but that is how I kind of felt more or less about all three of the books. Just kind of went downhill the further and further I got. But anyway, that is it. That is everything that I read this past month / kind of the end of December. So this wasn't the funnest of videos to make because I am not in the best of mood because I've been having such a sucky time with reading. But you know what? It could change. It could change. It could change. It could change. Even though I had a bad month now, doesn't mean that I'm going to have a bad next month. So hopefully I will end up picking up something good very soon and I'll get myself out of this horrible slump that I've been in. But either way, that's it. That's everything that I wanted to share with you. So if you have read any of the books that I talked about in today's video, then I would love to hear about it down below because I'd love to know, is it just me being in a reading slump that none of these books really worked out for me? Or did I have the unfortunate coincidence of picking up a handful of not great books all back to back? So leave me a comment down below if you have something to share. But either way, if you like this video, then please give it a thumbs up. Also subscribe to my channel if you're not currently subscribed because I would really appreciate it. But either way, I just appreciate you watching my video, especially because this probably was not the funnest video to watch because I wasn't in the best of moods. But either way, that's it. That's all I gotta say. So thank you so much for watching, and until next time, enjoy reading.